Hello and welcome back to Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast in which Craig Touch and myself, Roland Hume, chat to some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry we're in of writing and self-publishing. And today we are absolutely delighted to have a very special guest all the way from Craig's hometown of Toronto. We have Jennifer Lieberman, who is an actor and an award-winning and best-selling author in her own right. And she is here to share some real wisdom with us. So Jen, we are delighted to have you. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm doing well, Roland. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we are very excited to have you. And of course, he wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig? What is the weather like up in Toronto?
I'm doing great. It's always warm in the summer. So we're good over here. A little humidity, but that's all good. Thanks, Jen, for coming on. I know, we had talked about you coming on for a while, and, it's just been a scheduling thing. So today, we wanted to talk. You've written a book about, publishing your own audiobook, and you have it sort of broken down into 7 simple steps, which is always exciting, right? We always like simple steps for doing complicated things. Audiobooks are one of those things that a lot of authors are, these days I think they're becoming really a lot more popular than they were, but a lot of people are still sort of daunted by all the work involved, whether they hire out somebody to do a lot of it for them, all of it for them, or they just do it themselves, right? It's often sort of like a bit scary. So the fact that you've broken it all down into 7 simple steps, and it's a #1 bestseller, which means, it's obviously the right 7 steps, I think, right? So why don't you talk a little bit about, how you got to this point and writing this book and everything like that, and then we'll go from there.
Yes, thank you so much, Craig. It's actually really funny how it came about, because I never intended to write a book about audiobooks or recording an audiobook. But I ended up recording my own audiobook for my novel, and I messed up so much, but I didn't realize how much I messed up until I had recorded the entire thing. So then I basically threw out 2 months of work and 2 months of recording and started from scratch. And I had a friend / colleague who was the one that suggested I recorded the audiobook anyways. This was during the OG 2020 lockdown. So I was at home with nothing to do anyway. So when I told her that I re-recorded the whole thing a second time, she's like, "Oh, that's great. Now you can write a how-to book." To help other self-published authors avoid making the same mistakes. So that's basically how this was born and how it came about. Basically just from my own experience of doing a poor job the first time.
What could you have screwed up so badly that you had to re-record everything?
Well, basically, because I was doing different voices for all the characters. So my novel was originally a one-woman show where I played 10 characters on stage. So I just felt like it was kind of fitting that I would do kind of voices for all the characters.
Well, my question was going to be, you describe yourself as an actor, and of course, voice acting is acting. So it seems like a natural thing to want to voice your own book.
Exactly. But I didn't realize how many inconsistencies there were until I was editing, because sometimes a character wouldn't come back for 3 or 4 chapters. And to get through those 3 or 4 chapters can be a week or 2 weeks, because you're not recording every single day, which is something I go over in the book. Because vocal stamina and things like that. But yeah, so it was a lot of things I just didn't really realize until the end. But that was the biggest one. And basically realizing that when I was recording my characters' voices, I would have to go through the entire manuscript and find every single place that particular character spoke, And I would have to go through all of their lines, like basically in one shot, to make sure the voice or the accent or the affect was consistent. And that was like the biggest kind of learning. But like a movie, for example, if you have an actor coming in to do ADR, which is to do some sound recording or looping or whatever, you have them come in and book the studio for 1 or 2 or 6 or however many hours you need. And they do all their lines for the whole movie. It's not like you do one scene at a time and call them in 20 times to do 20 different scenes. So it kind of makes sense when you think of it in that respect. It's just not really what I was thinking of at the time. So
the first time you
That's-
basically just started reading through the book, and then the second time you like, highlighted each character in a different color and then read through, all their
yeah, well,
lines.
I kind of did that at the beginning for the main characters. So there's 2 kind of lead female characters. So I did that for those 2 because they were the most prevalent and they were the ones who were in every single chapter consistently. But yeah, I realized I had to do it for more than just that. And then I realized like I kind of came up with a pretty good system of how to do it. And not just that, I think I really helped manage people's expectations in terms of timeline, because it is going to be time consuming. This isn't something you're going to bang out in a long weekend, not by a long shot. Like not even if you're the top voice actor in Hollywood, it's not happening. So
I do think audiobooks are so exciting, but it's because of that commitment. It's like I love them because you can do other things while you're listening to them, and because the actors bring such a different experience to it. But yeah, it's a lot of work.
yeah, it definitely is. And one of the things I talk about in the book is a blooper reel. Like if you are a fan of like any sitcom or whatever, you can go on YouTube and you can watch blooper reels. So you can see realistically, even for professional actors who are getting paid $1 million an episode, everybody's flubbing their lines, and it happens frequently. It's unusual to get through a whole take without a mistake, as opposed to the opposite. So that's another thing that people really have to be prepared for. It's like you can't be so hard on yourself and so judgmental. You just have to take a breath, go back to the beginning of the sentence or the beginning of the paragraph, and keep going. And it's going to be a lot in the editing process, but it's almost impossible to read through a whole page without flubbing something.
Yeah.
And one of the other things I talk about is on the days that you're recording, you're not just going into the booth and sitting down for the first time reading the material. Like before you actually sit down in the booth on the same day, you should be reading that chapter minimum of once, hopefully twice, out loud before you even go into the booth, because there has to be a rhythm to it. There has to be some sort of cadence. You have to know, when certain predicates are coming up, if you want to emphasize certain parts of phrases or certain words, if characters are coming into play, that type of thing. So there is like a strategy to it, and there's a way to be prepared, but you also have to realize no matter how prepared you are for it, there's going to be lots of mistakes, and you just have to be patient.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, just reading something, when I've read to my kids for a little while, you read it, just even a chapter, and you're kind of like tired and exhausted. Your voice, you just want to stop. Your mouth gets dry. it's a lot to do in one sitting. And so I imagine, doing a whole book, you probably don't even do a chapter a day.
Well, I do suggest a chapter a day, depending on how long the chapter is, because it has a certain flow to it. Like
Right.
that's the other thing too. You don't want it to be too choppy and too chopped up, because energetically you're going to be different every time you're in the booth. But at least for each chapter, you want it to kind of feel the same. But yeah, and especially if you're reading the chapter 1 or 2 times before you're in the booth, like this is a 4-hour day we're talking about, so even if it's on a weekend, like that's still a big chunk of your day. And especially if you're doing it after work or after, kids go to bed or whatever, it's a commitment.
Yeah.
So tell me, speaking of that commitment, I mean, your book is a guide to authors who want to record their own book. How realistic is that an option for authors? Because you were an actor beforehand, and
Yes. So the way that I see it is, you don't have to be an actor to be a good storyteller to tell your story. So my book is really geared towards self-published authors who wrote their own book, because who better to tell your story than you? And sure, everybody dreams of getting like Matt Damon or some Hollywood actor, to read their book, and that would be fantastic. I'm not saying don't go for that, but there are definitely other options. There's options of having other actors read it who aren't, big, huge Hollywood stars. But I do think there is something to be said for telling your story with your kind of passion and point of view. So this is specifically geared towards those people. And I think reading the book will definitely give somebody a sense of whether or not this is something they want to sign up for. Like I said, I really do manage expectations, because part of the battle, like with most things, but part of the battle is, or the biggest hurdle is convincing yourself to do it. Even I had trouble convincing myself, to do my own audiobook, even though I am a performer, because I'm like, I'm not that kind of a performer. That's not, oh my goodness, I keep hitting my head. Sorry, I'm going to move up a little bit.
So, I mean, that's a good point. So this book is for people that are specifically want to record it themselves, not for just going through the process of hiring someone else.
Yeah, this is more geared towards self-published authors who want to have a go at it, because why not? We all don't know what we can do until we try. So there's definitely people out there where they know 100% like it's not for them, but there's definitely other authors out there who are like, you know what, like I was interested in theater, or I did, have a background in radio or whatever. I would like to have a go at this. So why not?
Right. And I mean, it's certainly cheaper than hiring out some actor or voice performer to do it. Whether you hire them, pay them, a flat fee, or you give them, a lot of people do a revenue share. But obviously, if you can do it yourself, then it's just a matter of the time that it takes.
Exactly.
Right. So, okay. So let's talk a bit about, the 7 steps and what those are, and maybe that helps people understand too, what they're getting themselves into.
Well, step number 1 is yes, you can. Because the biggest hurdle, like I said, is convincing yourself that this is something that you can do, that it's not so far out of your reach. Because we all tell stories all the time. It's not something new. We tell stories to people every single day. So just kind of giving ourselves permission to try, giving ourselves permission to fail, is definitely number one. So it's yes, you can. And then number two is getting in shape. So this is where the commitment begins, because it's a lot on your voice. It's a lot of vocal stamina. And it's very unrealistic to be a regular person. When I say regular person, I mean not a professional voice actor, voice performer, professional speaker, somebody like that. It's not realistic to think that you can just sit down and flow through a chapter like that day in and day out for several weeks in a row until your book is done. So I basically have a chapter of vocal exercises and a suggested schedule, starting at 5 minutes a day, working your way up to 30 minutes a day of doing these vocal exercises for a good month before you even sit down and attempt to even read your book. Because it's like a marathon, right? Like, yeah, there are lots of people who are sitting on the couch one day and like I'm gonna run a marathon, and then they train for a few months, and then by the summertime they run the marathon. But nobody gets off the couch that day and like runs the marathon that day. So that's kind of how I compare it, because we don't really think of like our voice as like a muscle or a tool or an instrument, but it's very unnatural for us to sit and speak for an hour straight uninterrupted like we would if we were reading a chapter of our book. Even
Right.
professional speakers, even radio hosts, even radio talk show hosts. It's like every couple of minutes, something cuts in, there's commercials, there's a song, there's a jingle, there's a this, there's a that. Like, if you actually add up the amount of minutes within an hour these people are actually speaking, it's maybe a half hour, but it's totally broken up. So that's like, after wrapping your head around like, yeah, I'm actually going to do this, then you kind of have to step up to saying like, okay, I'm going to commit. Because if your voice is cracking, if your voice isn't smooth, like, you don't have to have like a professional, like, late night radio DJ voice. That's not what I'm suggesting. But there does have to be some sort of smoothness, some sort of cadence, something that makes it easy for the listener to listen to. So yeah.
For sure.
So
I think
I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, we talk for, just 45 minutes on these, and, I can see how it can be tiring. We're not even doing most of the talking. Usually it's the guest that's doing most of the talking, but by the end of it, yeah, it's almost like you need to rest your voice.
And like
Yeah.
Craig, I read to my kids as well, and like especially when you have to do the different accents and things like that,
Yeah.
you also have to follow along and read it exactly as you said, so it's understandable for the person who's listening to it. You've got to time everything right, which means you kind of have to be thinking fast the whole way through, and it's exhausting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's very active.
I see a lot of those, sometimes on TV shows when they have an actor on the show or whatever, and he's doing vocal exercises and stuff like that. So I imagine that's kind of like what you're suggesting that they do in the book, sort of you've learned from your own acting experience.
Yeah, part of it. Well, it starts with breathing exercises, because if we don't have breath, we can't make sounds. That's where like the sounds originate from. So doing some breathing exercises, doing, just kind of like stamina, like holding kind of notes for longer periods of time, but also articulation exercises, because when we're reading, we want the words to come out clearly. We want things to be crisp. We want sounds to be able to be differentiated. So that's another one too, is like doing exercises where you're like over enunciating, and you're really giving like your lips and your tongue and your mouth a workout. So, things are pretty clear, because like you said, Roland, a lot of people are multitasking these days when they're listening to audiobooks also. So you can't be like mumbling. And a lot of people play them with the speed increased a little bit. So all the more reason to have to like really articulate words clearly. Yeah, so I have a whole schedule of exercises. And at the time, like, I was fortunate. I had just come off working on a play, so I was used to doing the vocal exercises every day. And I do suggest to continue the exercises throughout the entire process. So like, even on the days that you're recording, those days, of course, you should be doing the exercises. Like, you don't stop after just the first month. It's like you continue doing these exercises and making sure your voice is warm every day before you go in the booth.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. So then what's step 3? Oh, okay. Go ahead, Ron.
No. Go right ahead.
No, I was just going to say, what's step 3 then?
So step 3 is set up to win. So you want to get yourself set up properly. So you want to get yourself equipment. I purchased a microphone off of Amazon for $60. And then I purchased a pop screen for, I guess, like $15 or $20. A pop screen is kind of like a mesh circular screen that you can put in front of your microphone, because especially when you're doing vocal recording, all those kind of little mouth noises become amplified. So the pop screen becomes important. And then I downloaded Audacity, which is like free like editing software for audio recording. And I cocooned myself into a closet, basically. So, physically, like, you want to be sitting upright on a chair. You want to be able to breathe and, have your vocal instrument available to you, but you also like want to have the pages you're reading in front of you. You would prefer them to be on the computer, because then you won't rustle any noises when you're like flipping pages and stuff. That can get really distracting. And yeah, like, I had pillows and blankets basically around me. So I didn't use a recording studio. I didn't spend a lot of money. The setup was really simple and inexpensive, but also, of course, like, I tested my microphones. It was a little bit of trial and error, trying to get things, exactly the way they need to be, timing it around the gardener not being outside mowing the lawn, because it seemed like almost every time I went into the booth, the neighbors had somebody mowing the lawn, and I was like, like, every time.
I know. It's like someone's waiting around the corner with a leaf blower, just waiting.
Exactly. It was pretty crazy. So there's little things like that you can't help. But yeah, but just having, and you have to be comfortable where you're sitting. Like, you can't like cram yourself into like a tiny little closet where you can't breathe and you're like super cramped and uncomfortable. Like, you need to be sitting there for an hour to an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours on some days. So it has to be comfortable. You have to have water next to you. You have to, like, make it a cozy environment. But once again, like, you don't need to spend a lot of money. Not at all.
Yeah, that sounds like I like the idea of, putting yourself in a small closet-y space surrounded by pillows and blankets to create your own sort of recording studio experience.
That just sounds nice, not even necessarily to record anything.
Have a nap,
Yeah, exactly. Have a nap.
kids can't find you.
Get your
spend a
blankie
few
and your
hours.
teddy bear and just disappear for a couple hours. Yes. So set up to win, and then smile. You're recording, even though you're not on camera. So that's the other thing too, is you need to have fun with it. Like, you need to be passionate about what you're saying. You have to bring in energy to it. You have to smile when you're talking, because your voice sounds very different when you're smiling as opposed to when you're really focusing hard and really concentrating and everything gets like really tight and really strained. So there has to be a certain energy to it also. And you can't expect yourself to just like automatically be able to turn on every single day that you're hoping to record, because that's just not reality either. We all have like lives and jobs and other things to deal with. So, so that's the other thing too, is like, you really have to be in that headspace to do it. And if you're not in the headspace, don't bother, because you're going to have to re-record the whole chapter anyways.
Yeah, you don't want to go through that process like you did.
I mean, that must have been quite heartbreaking when you realized that you needed to do the whole thing again.
It wasn't a fun realization. Like, it wasn't. However, I was optimistic about the opportunity to have a second go at it, because it's hard to get it right. I don't even know if I got it right. You know what I mean? Like, it's just such a daunting kind of thing, and doing it on my own without having like a director and a team of people like saying like, do it this way or try it that way, or I think I did a good job, but it's like with anything, you never know.
Yeah.
You never know.
Your audience, the reception your audience gives you tells you, I think, if you did it right.
Yeah, I guess so. And then the next one is crowd control your characters. So, which is what I was talking about earlier, is like, if you're bouncing around, with characters that are coming and going in and out of different chapters, you really need to like wrangle them in and do a sit down and do all the vocals for one specific character at one specific point in time, and then move on to the next guy. And you'll figure out a way how to schedule that the best way you can. But that was like my biggest faux pas. That was like my biggest flaw, my biggest mistake. And yeah.
So is there a strategy for doing that? Like, basically, like, especially if I was thinking, you print it out and you highlight in different colors, but you were saying about having it on the computer. So maybe there's a way.
Well, yeah. So when you have it on your computer, when you're working in a PDF document, you can highlight things different colors. So
Right.
Yeah, that's what I would say. And basically the way that I chose which ones to do is like, as soon as they'd appear in a chapter, I would just go and grab everything that character did, the first time that they appeared. Right. And I would have like a separate folder for all of that guy's lines. And I would have it labeled with like what chapter and what page for each little sound bite. And that's how I did it, because it can get really complicated.
Well, I mean, I was thinking that would add a lot of complication to the editing process, pulling it all back together then in the audiobook format, when you have all these different files of different people speaking at different parts of the book. Now you've got to reorganize it and make sure that it's all in the right order, and you put everybody in separately.
So it's it's not as difficult as it sounds, because basically you're recording each chapter, one chapter at a time. So, say your book has 15 chapters, you've got 15 audio files. And then say, no, just bear with me for a second. And then say you have like 20 characters. So then you'll have 20 audio files, one for each character that's labeled. And basically you just start at the beginning of the book and you just cut and grab like each character as they come up. And it's a little time consuming, but it's not as complicated or as difficult as it sounds.
So if you have 10 characters and 10 chapters, let's say, so you're going through and creating one audio file per character for all the chapters, or per chapter. So,
so basically, if it's like my main character, that main character's voice is going to be in every single chapter, and that's going to be like a standard voice. So depending on how many main characters you have, like for mine, I had 2 main characters, and those 2 would trade off every single chapter. So I didn't have separate audio files for them. They were just embedded.
Is it when you have like lines of dialogue and stuff that you have to put in?
Yeah, exactly. When you're putting in lines of dialogue for other characters that are like sporadic, so to keep their voices consistent. I feel like it's sounding more complicated than it is as we're talking.
No, I know what you mean. I have funny accents for all the characters in the stories I read my kids, and you have to. For sometimes it takes you a second to get into it, and sometimes maybe it sounds a bit different to how you intended it, and from one reading to another. So you need to get into the zone to read all of that, so it's consistent the way through.
Yeah, and also just the way that the software records sound. It's very easy to just be like chapter 1 and then do all the dialogue for chapter 1, and then say chapter 2 and then do the dialogue for that particular character for chapter 2. It's really simple. Audacity is like really simple sound, like audio recording equipment and editing software. It's really cool. It's open source. And I even have like diagrams in the book and stuff to show people how to like use it and edit it on it. But yeah, so it's not as difficult, I promise. It's not as difficult as it sounds. But yeah, you're going to have different files for each chapter. And then after you finish doing the main bulk of the chapter, you're going to go back and say you have like 2 or 3 little minor characters that you need to like grab their voices for. You'll do those files.
Right. So the editing process, I imagine, still takes a while though.
Yeah, the editing process definitely takes a while.
Because I guess if you were reading the book,
maybe 2 months, I say like from the day you decide to do this, if you decide like today I'm going to start doing this and tomorrow you begin, minimum 6 months.
I imagine if somebody was to, maybe they don't have a lot of characters or whatever, then if they're say doing a chapter per day, that would be a much simpler editing process, right? Because then it's just one chapter.
Yeah, that would be simpler in the editing process. But once again, like I said, you barely get through a page without flubbing something. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's like,
Oh, so when you do that, do you just read the line again, or you stop, create another file?
No, you don't stop. That's the whole thing, is like you just keep it rolling. You take a breath, you go back to the beginning of the sentence or the beginning of the paragraph, wherever it needs to flow from, and you just keep going. So when you go through the editing process, you're going to be cutting out all of these chunks where you have to like go back and take a breath and go back and fix and go back and this. And in an hour's time, there's dozens of them. So so to have like another window open while you're doing that, inserting some of the lines of like the minor characters, it's not such a big deal because you're already working on that canvas. So to throw a little color here and a little color there, to pepper in these voices, well, the big job is like going through like word by word, does everything match? Did you skip a sentence? Did you skip a this? Did you, so that's what I mean, like cutting and pasting these things into the framework of it all is quite minor compared to all the other editing you're going to have to do.
Right. I mean, the way I was thinking of it is like, you screw up on a line and then you just sort of like move the editing back a bit and start again so that when it's done, you just have that finished chapter.
If you stop and start every time you make a mistake, you're going to be there for days.
Right.
Days.
I'm sure it would slow you down. Yeah. Yeah. It's just, having to listen to it over and over again, I think would be a tough for some people, would be harder than others.
Oh, yes. Especially because we're our own worst critics. And like, I think all of our, we all have like the feeling that our own voice is like nails on a chalkboard after a while. So, it's a commitment and it's a challenge, but it definitely, it's worth it. Like, I think it's a worthwhile endeavor.
Yeah. Okay. So what are we on now? Step 6, I think.
Okay. Yes. That's editing and exporting, which we were already just talking about. So yeah, basically it's going through the nitty-gritty and making sure, like I said, all your sentences are correct, that you're not missing pages, that you're not, that you didn't like turn the page or whatever, scroll and accidentally miss something. You want to make sure that like you're not missing words, which happens sometimes when we're reading, like we think we're reading a specific sentence, but we like miss a word or anyway. So that's part of the editing. And then like cutting out all the mistakes that you made, all the times you flubbed, and just getting like a clean cut of like beginning to end for each chapter, inserting the characters, and then exporting it properly, which like depending on what platform you're going to use to publish it. I was like, launch? No, it's published. Yeah, we publish audiobooks now. Interesting. Sorry, that took me a minute. So yeah, depending on where you're going to publish it, there'll be specifications for like the export. So I go through that. And then the final step is you made it and putting it out and launching it into the marketplace. And there's different options in the book. I used ACX, and that's kind of like the Amazon for audiobooks, or like the KDP, because it gets it on several other platforms. So like through ACX, it is on Amazon and it is on Audible and it's on, a whole bunch of stuff, but they do have very particular specifications. They have specifications for how each chapter needs to be saved, how each one needs to be labeled, how you have to leave a certain amount of dead air at the beginning and a certain amount of dead air at the end, and all of those fun nitty-gritty little things. And of course, each platform is going to have its own specifications. I have some of them for examples in the book, but obviously not every single one. And the book was published 2 years ago, so I'm sure certain things would be updated by now that are not in this older publication.
Wow, lots to know. So just to go back to the editing for a second, when you were talking about, watching to make sure that you didn't miss, sentences, pages. So I guess, to do that, you would be following along as you're listening. Is that how you're doing it? Yeah, and just making sure. So then if you discover you mess something up, I guess then you just fix that by re-recording on the fly.
Yep, exactly. Well, actually, I went through the whole book and made a note of all the mistakes I made because I had to re-cocoon at this point. And
Right.
yeah, it's not like, oh, I'm editing, I found a mistake, let's run in the cocoon and spend 20 minutes setting up and whatever.
I thought you were editing from the cocoon, so.
No, the cocoon is difficult to edit in. There's not that much room, but yeah, so I'm sorry. I'm imagining myself editing in the cocoon now. So yeah, so that's what I would do.
Okay, well that makes sense. And so when you're launching it with all those different things, so ACX is that a platform for creating or launching?
Yeah, so it's a platform. They actually compare you up with other voice actors who can read your audiobook for you. They have different payment structures for things like that. Or if you have your own recording, you can upload it through their platform and they make it available in the marketplace. So those are two different options. You can go either way. And like I said, this book is a pretty good gauge. It really manages expectations. So if it's something you're thinking about, if you take a look at this will really let you know what you're in store for, and you can decide whether or not you want to commit. Because it is, it's a commitment. Because it's funny, when a friend of mine was proofreading it for me, she's like, "Are you sure you want to say all these things? Because if I was reading this, it would really make me not want to do this." And I was like, "Why? Because I'm telling people how long it takes?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Well, shouldn't they know before they decide to do something and then realize that they put 2 months into something that's going to take 5 more months and then throw in the towel? Wouldn't you have rather not spend that 2 months on something that you weren't going to finish?" I don't know, personally.
No, absolutely. We're a big fan of giving everyone all the information they need before they get started to make informed choices and decide. Because that's exactly the thing is, do you want to do this? And some people, let's say they're money conscious, but you still. So you don't want to hire out a company to do it, or you don't want to hire actors or whatever. But you still have to think about. Then there's that time commitment, and it's not just sit down, read the book. It's editing. It's learning how to do all this stuff, learning how to use the software, learning, building out your cocoon, doing all these extra things that they didn't think about. So I think it's really important to have this information so that they don't just say, "Oh yeah, I'll do it myself because it's cheaper," and then get into this situation where they had no clue what they're doing.
Yeah, and also audiobooks are the way more people are consuming books today. More people are listening to audiobooks. They listen to them in the car, they listen to them at the gym, they listen to them when they're cleaning the house. They're so popular. And I remember when I first published my book, the most frequent question I got asked was, even before people asked me the title or what the book was about, "Do you have an audiobook?" And I used to get so frustrated because I'd be like, "Oh my God, I wrote a whole book. I wrote a book. Did you write a book?" And they don't realize the whole process, whether it's this huge financial commitment, that not everybody has. If you have a big publisher behind you, then it's more likely, but it's either this huge financial commitment or this 6 month or more time commitment. So as much as that's great, that's a great idea, I wish I had an audiobook, this kind of gives people an opportunity to be okay, I can have one in a year. I could.
Yeah,
and that
for sure.
And you've got to be in it to win it, basically. I mean, I think that's one of the things, it's very intimidating to a lot of authors, so they don't do that step. So unlike maybe Amazon, which, is saturated with new books being published all the time, I think there is still that opportunity, that void in the audiobook space that you can fill if you get it right.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not saying 100% of authors are going to be able to read their book, but not 100% of anyone's going to be able to do anything, but out of that 100%, there's probably 50% of authors who think maybe, and maybe out of that 50%, 20 actually try it.
Yeah.
You got to be in it to win it. That's the thing, isn't it? You can't fail unless you do it.
Yeah, and I can't predict it, but I can just kind of like share my experience with people and be like, look, it's not something I thought I was going to do either, but I did. And, it's not terrible. I did, and it's not terrible. That's
No, I mean, a lot of people, and we've done episodes before on audiobooks, and a lot of the time, the advice is to hire a voice actor, whatever. But that is not, the right solution for everybody. And so, a lot of the advice and a lot of the stuff that we've talked about before is about how to hire out people and how to, manage the whole process with all the different people involved. So it's nice to have it. So for people that want to just do it themselves, from start to finish.
Well, I agree. Yes, there is a place for hiring out people, but I also agree that there are a certain percentage of very passionate and very theatrical writers who would be well suited to tell their own stories. So what about those people? Okay, that might, like I said, it's not going to be 100% of writers, but maybe it is 10 or 20%. So there needs to be a resource. There needs to be something out there, for them to have a jumping off point and get a gauge of like, okay, how can I do this? And it's like, okay, if there are other indie authors out there voicing their own books, well, then why can't I voice my own?
Absolutely.
So yeah, like I think everybody has the power to create that opportunity for themselves if it's something that they feel suits them.
I think if your guide gets one person to take the plunge and do it and be successful at it, I mean, that's still an incredible thing to have achieved with it. So
yeah, I think so. Thank you. I agree.
This is the perfect time to wrap things up because we're coming to the top of the hour. But wow, thank you so much. And you've timed that perfectly because you went through all 7 steps within the time allotted.
Yay.
Craig, do you have any final questions?
No, like I said, it's great to have this kind of a resource because, like I said, we've talked about all this from the other angle of, hiring out people to do the different steps and why that's important. But it's obviously like anything, it's not a one size fits all thing. For some people, it's just better to go the route of doing it all yourself, and having a resource like this is very important for the people that want to go that path. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Well, that is wonderful. Now, Jen, where can people find out about you, about your books, about everything? Let us know, and we'll obviously pop a link to this down in the description down below. But yeah, tell us where people can find you.
Yes. So my website is makeyourownbreak.com, and you can find out all about me and what I do on the website. And then for social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, it's the @ I am Jen Lieberman. So @ I am Jen Lieberman, and that's me.
Fantastic.
Perfect.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jen. That has been a fascinating conversation. Hopefully, if you're listening to this or watching on YouTube, you found it just as valuable as we did. Be sure not to be a stranger. Go and leave us a comment. Let Jen know how much you appreciated what she had to share. While you're down there, if you haven't already, click that like button, hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Fully Booked. So until then, goodbye.